End of last week, things got real in terms of, I don't know, being able to access your bank account. Some airports got into some major problems, and, well, the whole IT world sort of crashed in on top of itself. Some people thought it was, I don't know, 24 years late for the Y2K bug. What on earth happened there? Well, to answer these and other questions, Justin Smith joins me in the studio. Justin, kia ora.
Tamari, yeah, happy to be support desk today.
Well, it was a busy time for the support desk, I imagine, with the global IT crash.
Yes.
They're calling it.
The Crowdstrike IT outage, and my goodness, what a monumentous outage that was.
Can I just say Crowdstrike sounds like a Decepticon? It really does. I mean,
does.
Yeah, Crowdstrike.
What kind of vehicle was he, though? Military.
Hummer, definitely.
Yeah, see, there you go.
Crowdstrike's a Hummer. Yeah, there we go. Well, okay, now that we've got that established, what actually is Crowdstrike?
So Crowdstrike is a enterprise, meaning obviously, big corporate behind the scenes, not the kind of thing that a consumer would install on the computer, but they're they're an enterprise level service provider that are on a lot of organizations' computers employed by their IT teams, and they are massive players globally.
Banks, airlines, hospitals,
Yep.
all the sort of stuff that you don't want to fail.
Yeah,
basically.
and ironically, they're Crowdstrike are actually in the business of cybersecurity, so generally preventing the kind of things that actually they caused in the end, which is incredibly ironic. But was a technical issue as opposed to a malicious one taking out all of this infrastructure.
Because that is important here. It was an oops, my bad, rather than a malicious player saying, you know what, we're going to take down the whole world. If we can attack CrowdStrike, we can bring the world to its knees. It does expose a bit of a vulnerability then if everybody's eggs are in the CrowdStrike basket. Yeah,
correct. And it really highlights the need for diversity and, erring away from monopolization across the board. I mean, effectively, it's what happened was it's the equivalent of, if you've seen those videos of, say, people that have big warehouses full of products and racks, and you see one pallet that's, 6 pallets or 6 stories high, and it starts to topple over, and then the entire thing just cascades in on itself. I mean, there's lots of videos like this.
Great videos to watch.
Exactly. And that's pretty much the equivalent of what happened here was that, one thing just happened to go south, and the downstream effects of that were catastrophic.
Everybody reliant on the one organization. Yeah, I mean, that does seem problematic, but perhaps part of the big problem is, as you said in the introduction, this is all happening behind the scenes. Nobody had ever heard of CrowdStrike until a week or so ago. And even in the organizations, even the CEOs of those organizations probably didn't know what was happening in the IT back office and how much reliance there was. Too much reliance, in your opinion?
Oh, I mean, I can see both sides of the coin because I've lived it having worked in IT roles in the past where actually for things like cybersecurity at the level that, that CrowdStrike provide it, actually you do want someone who really specializes in that space and potentially contract it out to that specialist, in this case CrowdStrike, because the alternative is obviously to develop and build and hire internally someone or a team that has the competency to be able to do the same things that they do.
Yep.
And we do that with so many of our services. Anyone who's in the business of e-commerce doesn't have their own courier drivers necessarily. We subcontract that to people who specialize in freight and logistics. So it just so happens that in this instance, that CrowdStrike were not only a massive player and affected a huge number of people globally, but certainly the level, the depth to which CrowdStrike operate and how close they are to the really critical infrastructure meant that it was the equivalent of the bottom of the rack falling out, and there's just so many cards stacked on top, that were just bound to fall down.
One of the questions, I suppose, with security like this, you gotta say, so what's the backup plan? So if that fails, so what other system which isn't connected to CrowdStrike could we bring into place to make things run smoothly? Seems like there wasn't one.
No, and that's the point about it being so close to critical infrastructure. I mean, so many when we see a lot of these failures and malicious attacks that do have global impact or otherwise, they're really at a surface level. A lot of these, things. The difference with CrowdStrike was that it's the equivalent of electricity itself being completely taken away from an entire region or nation, or forget everything that sits on top of it. You've lost electricity. You've got a lot more problems than just all of the things that needed it that have all fallen over. So,
and I mean, electricity is important. I think that's a good analogy, but in some ways it's more serious than this, because it was the financial sector, it was airlines,
healthcare.
It was healthcare, it was potentially the military. That could have gone a lot worse than it did. Was this a bit of a warning shot? Well, not a warning as in implying that there was something malicious, but that this has happened. Do you think that this will help us be better prepared for either something like this happening again, or perhaps a more malicious attack?
Yeah, I don't know that it's highlighted any concerns around the malicious intent that a lot of bad actors have, because like I say, all of that lives at a surface level, and it's very, very hard to penetrate 4 or 5 layers down to get to that level of, say, electricity. They're attacking other things. But what it's really highlighted is just how easily this house of cards can fall over, because effectively what had happened was that you had Microsoft and their servers deploying an update to a huge array of Crowdstrike computers that fell over in between. And there's a huge amount of mitigations that we put in place for, simple procedures like updating your computer, your phone, your devices that are connected to the internet, update all the time. And we do things like rolling out and phasing updates so that we release, this update to a certain region, a certain cohort, and so on and so forth. All of those mitigations are in place, and we've had 20 years of blue screens of death that have slowly faded out as we've learned, all of these lessons. The lesson that we learned specifically this time was, I cannot believe that this happened where one computer went, oops, and then the other computer went, yeah, sweet as, and so many computers just got absolutely annihilated instantly. But the problem with this specific case, typically these things happen quite a lot and happens overnight when people don't realize. And when they do go wrong, we do a thing called a rollback, where we go, oops, we've done something really bad here that's been missed in all our mitigations, all our testing. We'll put it back to the old case. The unfortunate thing with this CrowdStrike outage was it was the equivalent of taking all of our information and all of this stuff, throwing it into a room that was inaccessible and unlockable, and throwing away the one key that we had. And the only way to get it back was to go to every single person and get them to get their information back. We couldn't roll it back. It was a disaster.
That was a total disaster. Is Microsoft part of the problem here? Because, I mean, you're dominant within the industry. I mean, big Apple fan, just saying. Should we have a backup system on Apple or on Linux, or is that part of the issue?
Linux power users love that. But yes and no, because we don't have the benefits that we have in modern society without the likes of Microsoft and Apple, and it's not entirely their fault at all. Like I say, it was the interface between Microsoft and CrowdStrike. But it really highlighted that lack of when you have a monopolization or a huge amount of reliance on a single player or service provider to provide a really critical infrastructure related service. When that falls over, we're in big trouble. So it's imperative that we have competition.
In terms of a backup system, I'm thinking, pencil and paper, chalk and an abacus. And partly, I mean, moving the big systems out of the way, do you think, I'm wondering whether we've become too dependent on a digital lifestyle, whether we've lost some of the, okay, how do we used to do this before we had these big powerful computers and servers? We don't necessarily have the back office or even the skill set that we had a generation ago. Yeah,
definitely. And I think it's only because, we enjoy the luxury of convenience. And we've spoken about this in previous discussions. But I mean, a much more simpler, relatable one for a lot of people is, and we have this quite often in New Zealand, the digitization of commerce. And so when we go into stores and we use PayWave and we swipe our cards or insert it, that's fantastic. But when that mobile network goes down and FPOS is down across the country, how many of us still carry cash? That's a really great example of diversifying our, methods of being able to do the things that we want to do. And not only that, even if you are with a particular bank, there's nothing to stop you also being with another one, because say you're with, one of the big four and their services go down, at least you have access to funds elsewhere. And if the entirety of the digital funds go down, well, that's where you want to have some cash.
Stuff your mattress.
Silver bullion under your bed. That's what we're saying. Yeah.
Well, hey, hopefully some lessons will be learnt about what went wrong and perhaps tweaking some of the infrastructure around this. Justin, thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Anytime.
Hey, thanks very much for joining us in the Rhema studio. Thanks very much for watching the interview. It's kind of nice to have an audience, actually. And if you did like what you watched, then do give us a like, do give us the thumbs up. And if you'd like to see more interviews like that one, or perhaps even better, subscribe and those interviews will come straight to you. Don't forget to turn on your notifications, and we'll see you in the next one. Cheers.